What is going on, all you Pokemon collecting maniacs out there? This is Ryan, the PikaPikaPaPa, and oh my goodness, what a last couple months it has been here in the Pokemon collecting and investing space. Singles prices have been going absolutely insane, and I promise you, it's not just Prismatic Evolutions, it's not just Scarlet and Violet. Like, we're watching Sword and Shield prices take off, we're doing Sun and Moon, those prices are going nuts. Even XY era continues to grow in value. You know, at the end of this month, I'm going to show you my State of the Hobby video. We'll talk about how all of those different eras have moved, and I promise you they have increased in value. So it is not just these new sets that are popping off. Like, the overall market is in a very healthy spot right now. One might even say a little bit too frothy, but we'll just have to see how high these cards can actually go. But with that in the back of my mind, I thought, wouldn't this be a cool time to take a step back and look at some of the metrics that drive these cards? Like, what makes a chase card in the Pokemon space truly special? Because here, there is some subjectivity to it, right? Like, it's got to have awesome artwork, it's got to have a big name Pokemon, it's got to come from a popular set, but we don't have a lot of the things that you have to worry about in some of the other spaces, right? Like, I come from the sports card space. I was in there up until the last 5 years. That was where I was investing all of my money. And in the sports card space, it's very different, right? You can have a hot young player who you're investing a ton of money into their cards, you think they're the next big thing, and then all of a sudden something can happen. It can be an off the field issue, it can be they get traded to another team and they suck, they can, you know, get an injury and they're never the same player again, and then all of a sudden all of that value, all the money you've been putting into their cards, it literally almost evaporates almost overnight because nobody wants to buy those cards anymore because the player, for whatever reason, has lost what made them special. Here in the Pokemon space, for the most part, we don't have to worry about that. We can look at some of these underlying metrics. We know what the big Pokemon are. We know what the big sets are. We recognize early on what the hobby thinks is amazing artwork. And when we understand some of the metrics we're going to talk about throughout the course of this video, I think it gives us a really cool and a really fundamental understanding of what makes chase cards great. And that gets me so incredibly excited, right? So we're going to start off by talking about gem rates just a little bit. I'm going to blaze through these pretty quickly because I do have graphs, as I always do here at the end, that we're going to use as a comparison. But when we're talking about Prismatic Evolutions and the fact that that card at the very top, that Sunbreon, I guess that's what we're calling it now, is going for like $1,500 right out of the gate, it's important to take a step back and understand, you know, why is it that much? Obviously, people think it's the next Moonbreon. Whether it is or isn't, we'll yet to see, but we're going to do a really cool comparison at the end of this video, and you see it lines up a lot closer than a lot of people think. But the pull rates overall for those special illustration rares are 1 in every 45 packs, which sounds really good as we look at some of these Sword and Shield pull rates later on in this video. It's absolutely amazing, but the challenge with Prismatic Evolutions is there is 32 different special illustration rares. So the odds of pulling that one particular special illustration rare, that Sunbreon there at the very, very top, is actually about 1 in every 1,440 packs. Now, I told you, everybody thinks it's the next Moonbreon, and it very well might be. But when we compare it to Evolving Skies pull rates, which I just happen to have right here on this graph, it's even worse. The Moonbreon pull rate, believe it or not, is even worse than the Sunbreon that we were just looking at. So look at that Alt Art VMAX pull rate all the way on the far right. The odds of pulling a single unspecific VMAX Alt Art from Evolving Skies was 1 in every 332 packs. But the odds of pulling a specific one, the Moonbreon, is 1 in every 1,994 packs. No wonder everybody calls it Evolving Cries. Now, I want you to think about that. That's roughly 1 in every 2,000 packs. There's 36 packs in a booster box. That's about 55 booster boxes you would have to rip open to theoretically be guaranteed pulling a Moonbreon. Now, you could pull it much earlier than that. You could even pull it much later than that, but that's just the way you use math like this in odds. So you would have to open about 55 booster boxes to be guaranteed you're going to pull that. And think about the going rate for Evolving Skies booster boxes right now. That would cost you about $60,000 if you wanted to try and hunt for this card just in the raw and go out and open it up. It doesn't make any sense to do that. That's why we're seeing the card spike the way it is. And then we get into some of these other really cool sets. Surging Sparks, right? Again, look at it. Look at the special illustration rare pull rate right there. 1 in every 87 packs. So again, the pull rate of that is a little bit worse than we saw in Prismatic Evolutions. But guess what? Far fewer special illustration rares in Surging Sparks than there is in Prismatic Evolutions. the odds of pulling a individual specialized special illustration rare, if you want to get that Pikachu at the very top, the odds of pulling that is 1 in every 960 packs, right? Remember, the odds of pulling that Sunbreon in the very beginning was 1 in every 1,400 packs, and the Moonbreon was just shy of 2,000 packs. So the odds of pulling that Pikachu, much, much better than the other two cards we just talked about. And then I thought, for fun, let's look at the pull rates for Fusion Strike. Now, I will tell you, this was early on in the TCG stage. They just started setting up their pull rates. I don't quite understand why the Mew VMAX would have a pull rate which is half as good as the Gengar, but it doesn't matter. This is the data I committed to. This is what I'm using. But you can see, according to TCG Player, the odds of pulling a Gengar VMAX from Fusion Strike was 1 in every 1,080 packs. Pretty close to the Pikachu, but again, a far cry, much, much worse than that Sunbreon and Moonbreon that we had looked at earlier on. So now we're going to grid it out. We're going to look at a bunch of different cards, including the Gengar and a couple others from Sword and Shield, and we're going to compare them and see how they all stack up. But this is the point in the video where I take a pause and I say, if you're having a ton of fun, if you're getting a ton of value out of this video, hit that subscribe button or give us a thumbs up. I got a small channel. I obviously do a ton of work here, and those two small things go a long way in helping me out. So if you don't mind doing that, I appreciate it. If not, I still love you. You're still cool. So with that out of the way, let's look at what I was talking about. So here's what I did. I've got the Moonbreon, I've got the Gengar, I've got the Giratina. I pulled the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved. I got the Sunzard from 151. I got the Greninja from Twilight Masquerade, the Pikachu, obviously, from Surging Sparks. And then there in the bottom, in the bright yellow, that is the Sunbreon that we're now calling it, from Prismatic Evolutions. And I have the pack odds, I have the actual percent odds, the gem rate from PSA, got the raw price, the PSA 10 price, then I got the PSA 10 population. And for this exercise, I went ahead and just sorted it by release date. So this is sorted from oldest to newest. And obviously the Moonbreon, Evolving Skies, that was the oldest set to come out. And what was interesting to me is, you know, not that what you would not expect. This is what I would expect. You know, the older cards obviously have more value to them. They've been sold out for a long time. So, you know, the raw card of the Moonbreon is sitting up there at $1,600 now. You got the Gengar at $644. You got the Giratina at $563. And to be honest with you, listen, I shoot these in advance because I travel. These prices are probably even higher by the time you watch this video. Absolutely wild to think about that. So the next thing that I thought would be really cool is let's sort this by the odds. So these are the cards sorted from worst to best in terms of the odds of you actually pulling this card if you're ripping the pack open. So we talked about the odds of the Moonbreon were about 1 in every 2,000 packs. So the odds of pulling that is about 0.05%. And when you're talking about odds that small, it is infinitesimal, right? Like the odds of pulling it are so incredibly bad. Now, what do you see? The raw cards, right, has nothing to do with gem rate, but the raw card value for the Moonbreon and the Gengar, which happen to have our two worst percentage odds of pulling them, they also have the highest raw card price. And again, yes, they're big names. Yes, they're from Sword and Shield. Everything is exciting, but remember, Gengar or Giratina is from Sword and Shield as well. So the harder they are to pull, it makes sense that the raw card would obviously be valued the most. But then when you look at the bottom of that, conversely, you see the Magikarp from Paldea Evolved. You see the Sunzard from 151. The odds of pulling those two cards is much better. Matter of fact, it's almost double the Giratina from Lost Origin. So the odds of pulling those two cards are much better compared to its peers. And unsurprisingly, the raw card price for both of those cards is lower than everything else. $217 for the Magikarp, $237 for the Sunzard. Now the Magikarp I don't think is quite as big of a name as some of the other cards on this list, but you still got a super early gen Pokemon and you still got an awesome piece of artwork from what is shaping up to be a really incredible set. So interesting. Again, not surprising. Nothing in this video should be surprising. This is more for us to talk about the facts and the data and to understand what's going on, but the harder to pull the card, the higher the raw card price, the easier to pull the card, the lower the raw card price. Even in a card like the Sunzard, which is from 151, which is going to go down as one of the biggest sets from the Scarlet and Violet era. Obviously, Charizard's the most popular Pokemon of them all. So even with all of that, when it's easier to pull, guess what? The raw card price is going to stay a little bit lower than its peers. So the next thing that I thought would be really interesting would be to sort by gem rate, okay? So in my mind, I'm thinking, all right, here, we got the gem rate. The harder the gem rate it is, the more valuable the card is gonna be. So when we sort by this, we all know that that Paldea Evolved set had murderous gem rates when it came to it. I mean, I don't know who set up the printing plates for that one, but they probably don't have a job anymore. Even the Tyranitar is at like 19.5%. You got the Raichu, which is at like 20%. Then you got the Magikarp, the Big Chase card there, coming in at a 21% gem rate. So The interesting call out here is we talked about how the raw card price was the lowest of the one on the entire list, right? One of the easier cards to pull. But when you look at the PSA 10 price, guess what? It's one of the higher ones on the list. Matter of fact, if you look at the ratio between the raw card and the PSA 10 price, I mean, you're talking about almost 6x, right? So you take $217, you multiply it times 6, and you almost get to that $1,300 PSA 10 price. And when you go down the list and you look at it, look at the one that's the next one, the Sunzard, again, from 151, still an abysmally low gem rate at 35%. But then when you look at the raw card to the PSA 10 value, you're talking about a 4x right there versus the 6x of the Magikarp. Again, 21% gem rate is abysmally low. It is just so incredibly poor. So that's why you see the PSA 10 rate so high. And I thought that was a really interesting one to talk about. The other thing that I thought was really cool, down here at the very bottom, the two cards with the highest gem rate, the Gengar from Fusion Strike, the Moonbreon from Evolving Skies. So if you were fortunate enough to actually pull one of these two cards, the odds were heavily in your favor that they were in good condition, and the odds were heavily in your favor that you would be able to send it in and get a PSA 10. We've talked about this in the past, those VMAX cards from the Sword and Shield era, because the art extended all the way to the borders, right? They had a much better opportunity for perfect centering in PSA's eyes, and we saw a lot higher gem rate. But it didn't matter because it was still so incredibly hard to pull those cards. The artwork is so fire. The Pokemon are so incredibly popular that even with the gem rate being that high, they're just so hard to get your hands on. The PSA 10 prices are still through the roof, coming in at $1,450 and $2,800 right now for that Moonbreon. It's absolutely wild. So for me, it was kind of an interesting dichotomy here. So you have a card that's relatively easier to pull in the Magikarp, which has a really bad gem rate, and you have a really high PSA 10 price. But then you had other cards that had a really high gem rate, but it didn't matter because they're so hard to pull. There's still not going to be that many out there in PSA 10 cases, and you still see a high PSA 10 price right there. Now, you can look at the ones in the middle there and kind of come up with your own thing, but I thought that was a really interesting takeaway. So when I'm sitting back here and I'm thinking about, okay, the most important thing, unsurprising again to everybody, but it's always fun to see it in black and white, like the pull rates is the most important thing. I mean, can you imagine if you had a Magikarp card with that type of gem rate and it was paired with the Moonbreon or Gengar pull rates? I mean, that card would, I don't even know how much that card would be, just be absolutely silly to think about how high in value that could be. So of course, I did what I always do, and I thought, let's draw some comparisons here at the very end. So in the bright yellow, I have two of the biggest cards from the Sword and Shield era, and obviously I'm comparing them to some of the cards from the Scarlet and Violet era in yellow. And I've got the Giratina from Lost Origin, which we didn't talk much about, but the reason I have that one in orange down there is because if you look at the odds of pulling that card, it was about 0.12%. And then if you look at the Pikachu and if you look at the Latias from Surging Sparks, it's 0.1%. So we're talking about, you know, pretty close to same odds of pulling the Giratina as the odds for pulling the Pikachu and the Latias. And then I had to make the comparison because it just makes sense. The Sunbreon and the Moonbreon, again, both of them have absolutely abysmal pull rates. Both of them are really close. 0.05% and 0.07% might as well be pretty close to the exact same when you think about the margin of error. So those are like for like comparisons. So when you look at the Giratina, it has a raw card price right now of $563. It has a gem rate of 46%. I know it's early in the Surging Sparks era. I know there haven't been a ton of them that have been submitted to PSA, but there have been enough. There is 2,000 of those Pikachu special illustration rares from Surging Sparks in PSA 10 holders already. For me, that sample size is big enough to feel confident in saying it's going to be a low 40% gem rate. So it's a little bit harder to pull than the Giratina. The gem rate's going to be a little bit lower than the Giratina. So I do think that that has the opportunity to probably in the long run be worth more money than the Giratina. And you already see the Giratina from a PSA 10 price and from a raw card prices all the way above that. So who knows? Take it with a grain of salt. I'm just lining up the numbers. And then when you look at the Sunbreon and the Moonbreon, obviously it'll take us a while to get gem rates on the Sunbreon, but from a pull rate perspective, you know, they're almost the same. And then when you look at the raw card with the Sunbreon already being priced in at the Moonbreon prices, I just thought it was really interesting. Like lots of cool stuff to take away. I don't have a crystal ball. I don't know where these cards will go. I don't know what's going to be worth more or worth less, but I hope that this type of information helps you. And I'm going to try and bring more info like this as sets come out. I'm just trying, when we're talking about chase cards, start layering in, you know, the odds to pull them and the gem rate and all of that to give us a more complete view of these cards as we're moving forward. So I hope you enjoyed the video. Super data heavy, not a lot of pretty pictures, but I hope you enjoyed the video and you had fun along the way. And if you did, hit that subscribe button or give us a thumbs up. I appreciate you more than I can say. I'll talk to you later. Thanks, everybody. Bye.